Before you read this, ask yourself one question. When was the last time you judged someone before you knew their story? When was the last time you looked at a person and thought you had them figured out in 3 seconds flat? Their worth, their rank, their place in the room, just from the way they looked. Most people won't admit it, but most people do it every single day. This is the story of Commander Maya Reyes. And by the end of it, you'll never look at a room full of strangers the same way again. The morning started the way all mornings do in military circles. Loud, purposeful, and soaked in the smell of bad coffee that nobody complained about, because complaining about coffee was not something soldiers did. The Naval Special Warfare Command building in Coronado, California sat low and wide against the California sky, the kind of building that didn't need to be tall to feel heavy. It had weight in its walls, history in its floors, the kind of place where the air itself seemed to carry rank. Commander Maya Reyes walked in at 0630. She was wearing civilian clothes. That was the first thing people noticed. Not her face, not her posture, though her posture was the kind that came from 10,000 hours of carrying weight in silence. Not her eyes, which were the flat, watchful gray of someone who had learned a long time ago to register everything and react to nothing. No, they noticed the clothes. Dark jeans, a plain green jacket, hair down, slightly wavy, the kind of hair that had clearly been let out of a tight bun for the first time in a while and was still deciding what shape it wanted to be. She looked to the 3 men standing near the front reception desk, like someone's wife. The thought moved across their faces before they could stop it. One of them, a young petty officer named Harris, 22, recently assigned, still learning the art of keeping his expressions locked down, actually turned to the man beside him and raised an eyebrow. The man beside him, Senior Chief Brannigan, 51 years old and built like something that had been left out in bad weather for decades and had only gotten harder for it, did not return the eyebrow. He had been in the Navy long enough to know that raised eyebrows in military buildings had a way of coming back to haunt a man. He stared straight ahead. Maya walked to the front desk. The petty officer at the desk, not Harris, another one, a woman named Torres who had been there all of 6 weeks, looked up with the bright customer service smile that new personnel wore before they learned it wasn't necessary. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "Commander Reyes," Maya said. "I'm here for the 0700 brief." Torres blinked, typed something, looked at the screen. The brightness in her smile did a small, involuntary flicker. "I'm sorry. The 0700 is a classified brief for the Joint Task Force Evaluation Team." I know what it is," Maya said. Not unkindly, not with heat, just with the flat, patient certainty of a woman who had said words like this before and had stopped being bothered by the need to say them a long time ago. "I'm leading it." There was a pause. The pause was the kind that fills a room without making a sound. Harris, near the wall, had gone very still. Brannigan had not moved. Torres was doing the very quiet, very internal calculation that people do when they realize they are standing at the edge of an embarrassing moment and must decide how to step back from it with grace. She slid the visitor's badge across the desk. "Of course, Commander." "Welcome." Maya clipped the badge to her jacket, picked up her coffee. She had carried her own from a place on the street outside in a plain paper cup because she had opinions about base coffee, and walked down the hall. She had been through this door 17 times in the last 3 years. She knew which light flickered in the second corridor. She knew that the third door on the left stuck unless you lifted the handle slightly before turning. She knew where the good seats were in the briefing room, the ones that had both a clear sight line to the projection screen and a natural angle to watch the faces of the people she was evaluating. She took one of those seats, and she waited. They came in 2 and 3s. 12 men in total, plus 2 women, all in uniform, all carrying the crisp, contained energy of people who had been told this evaluation mattered and had dressed accordingly. They were from different branches, different backgrounds, different ranks, but the Joint Task Force had pulled them into the same room and the same assessment process, and the result was that peculiar, competitive stillness that happened when capable people sat next to other capable people and tried to look like they weren't measuring themselves against them. Not one of them knew who Maya was. That was by design. This was something that most people outside the military didn't understand, and most people inside it had forgotten or never learned, which was that the highest-ranking people in the most specialized units were often the ones you saw coming and still couldn't place. They didn't walk around broadcasting. The job had trained that out of them. The job had required them to become, in every civilian space, unremarkable, invisible, present, and undetected at the same time. Maya Reyes had been doing this for 22 years. She had entered the Navy at 20, after 2 years of college that she had paid for herself, after a childhood in Laredo, Texas that had been complicated in ways she did not discuss, after a conversation with a recruiter that had lasted 45 minutes and changed the entire vector of her life. She had not told anyone in that recruiter's office that she was going to become a SEAL. She had barely told herself. The idea had lived in her chest for a long time before she gave it words, because giving something words made it possible to fail at it. And she had learned very young that the way to do impossible things was to not look directly at them until you were already halfway through. She went through BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training, the program that had a dropout rate somewhere around 70 to 80%, depending on the class, the year, the particular combination of cold water and human stubbornness that showed up. The program that was not, at the time she entered it, officially open to women, but she had entered under an experimental integration program, one of 6 women who walked onto that beach in Coronado, one of 2 who finished. She did not talk about that often. She did not talk about a lot of things often. The things she had done the years after, the deployments, the operations that didn't have names in any public record, the decisions made in darkness in places most people couldn't find on a map. Those things lived in classified files and in her own body and nowhere else. She carried them the way people carry old injuries, mostly without thinking about it, occasionally with a deep, sudden awareness of exactly where the weight was sitting. Now she was 42, commander, the senior officer on the Joint Task Force evaluation, and the person who, by the end of this week, would determine which of the 14 people in this room were sent to the next phase of a critical counterterror operation. She sat in civilian clothes and drank her coffee. Nobody looked at her twice, except one person. His name was Lieutenant Commander Garrett Walsh, 38, Delta Force attached, and he had spent his career being the most decorated, most certain, most naturally commanding person in any room he walked into. He had the build of someone who had never once skipped a workout, and the jawline of someone who knew it. He walked in, scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone sorting threats from non-threats, and his eyes passed over Maya the way they passed over the chairs, registered, filed, dismissed. Then, he sat down 2 seats away from her. He had a yellow legal pad. He was already writing things on it. He was the kind of man who arrived to things with yellow legal pads and wrote on them with intention, because in his experience, arriving with preparation and visible seriousness signaled leadership. And signaling leadership was a habit he had cultivated since he was a cadet at West Point and had never found a reason to stop. The other 12 people did their own version of this. They arranged themselves. They found their rank in the room, the way people do the invisible hierarchy sorting that happens in the first 4 minutes of any gathering of competitive professionals, and they settled. Maya watched all of it. The door opened at 0659. A junior officer, Ensign Park, who was running the administrative side of the brief, walked in, stood at the front of the room, and said the lead evaluator for this week's Joint Task Force assessment will now introduce herself. He looked at Maya. She stood up, and the room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like watching water find its level, a slow, cell-by-cell recalibration as 14 trained, high-functioning military professionals processed the fact that the woman in the jeans and the green jacket was the one Ensign Park was looking at, was the one standing up, was apparently, impossibly, the person he had just described as the lead evaluator. Walsh's yellow legal pad stopped moving. Harris, who had somehow ended up in this briefing room because someone needed to take notes, and he had been the closest available body, went the particular shade of pale that 22-year-olds go when they realize the eyebrow they raised 40 minutes ago might have been seen by the person they raised it about. Maya looked at the room. "Commander Maya Reyes," she said. "United States Navy SEAL. Senior Evaluator, Joint Task Force Vanguard Assessment. You have files on your tablets. Read them after. Right now, I want to talk about why we're here and what I'm looking for this week." She paused. Not for effect. Not for drama. She paused because she always paused before saying the thing that mattered, because a pause made people actually listen. "Most of you," she said, "have already decided something about this week. You've decided what kind of evaluation this is, what kind of evaluator I am, and roughly how you rank against the others in this room. You made those decisions in the last 4 minutes. Some of you made them before you walked in. Nobody moved. That," she said, "is what I'm actually evaluating." She picked up her coffee, took a sip. "We'll start in 10 minutes. There's a bathroom down the hall on the left. If you need to recalibrate anything, your assumptions, your attitude, your legal pad." Her eyes moved briefly without heat to Walsh. Now would be the time. She sat back down. The room was very quiet. And in that quiet, something had changed. It was not the loud, crashing change of a revelation. It was the quieter, more durable change that happens when a room full of people realizes, all at once, that they have been measuring the wrong thing. Maya drank her coffee. She had been through this moment, this specific, particular moment, more times than she could count. The moment when the room recalibrated. The moment when she went from invisible to seen. She had long since stopped feeling triumph at it. She had long since stopped feeling anything at it. Not because she was cold, but because she had learned that triumph of being underestimated was a trap. It meant you had made being underestimated part of your identity. It meant you needed the moment to feel real. She didn't need the moment. She had done the work. The work was real with or without the room's acknowledgement of it. That was something it had taken her a long time to learn, and something she suspected most of the people in this room, the ones with the legal pads and the crisp uniforms and the careful expressions, had not learned yet. They would have a long week ahead of them. She was going to make sure of it. Outside, the California sky was doing its usual indifferent thing. Blue, wide, permanent. The kind of sky that had been there before the base was built and would be there after. The kind of sky that didn't care what rank anyone in the building held. Maya had always liked that about the sky. She had always felt, looking up at it, that it was the most honest thing in the world. You brought everything you had, and it gave you exactly as much back as the weather required, and not one thing more. She had built her whole career on that logic. 14 people in this room were about to find out what that felt like. Point 4. The first day of the evaluation did not go the way any of the 14 people in that room had planned. That was by design. Maya ran assessments the way she ran everything. Not with noise, not with performance, but with a kind of quiet, systematic pressure that didn't announce itself until it was already on top of you. The first exercise wasn't a physical test. It wasn't a tactics simulation. It was a decision scenario, verbal, conducted in the briefing room. No files, no prep, no technology. Just a situation read aloud and a question. What do you do? The scenario was this. You're leading a 6-person unit in a denied access zone. Communications are down. One of your people has been compromised. Not killed, compromised, which is worse because now you don't know what they've told the other side or what the other side is about to do with it. You have a narrow extraction window. You cannot take everyone. You have 90 seconds to give me your decision and your reasoning. She went around the table. Most of them, the crisp ones, the legal pad ones, the ones who had spent years in environments where decisiveness was rewarded, gave answers quickly. Confident answers. Some of them used words like neutralize the liability and mission-first calculus with the ease of people who had been trained to frame human costs in neutral, operational language. It was not wrong. It was the language of the job. But Maya was listening for something else underneath the language. She was listening for the part that was real, the half second before the answer came out where the person decided whether to give her the textbook or give her the truth. Walsh gave her the textbook. He gave it well. His answer was structured, logical, covered the tactical bases with the efficiency of someone who had done this exact kind of verbal assessment many times and knew what evaluators wanted to hear. He did not rush. He did not hedge. He made eye contact, and he delivered, and when he was done, he sat back in a way that said, "That's what it looks like, and I know it." Maya wrote something on her notepad. She did not tell him whether it was good or bad. He noticed. She could see him noticing. He was the kind of man who was used to getting some form of confirmation when he performed well, a nod, a small acknowledgement, the tiny social signal that said yes, that landed, that counted. She gave him nothing. Not hostile, not warm, just nothing. And in the absence of feedback, his jaw tightened very slightly by maybe 2 millimeters. She wrote that down too. There was a woman at the far end of the table named Lieutenant Simone Abra. Navy. Intelligence background. 34 years old. She had been quiet all morning in the particular way that observant people are quiet. Not absent, but conserving. When Maya got to her, Simone took a breath and said, "I wouldn't make that decision alone. Not in 90 seconds. Not with the information you've given me. I'd spend 30 of those seconds getting someone else's read. Not because I can't decide, but because a decision like that lives with you, and I want to know my reasoning has been pressure tested before I act on it." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The held kind. The kind that meant people were recalibrating. Maya looked at her for a long moment. "That's the first honest answer I've heard all morning," she said. Walsh's jaw did the thing again. By the end of day one, the informal social structure of the evaluation group had already started to fracture and reform in the way social structures always did under sustained pressure. The confident ones were still confident, but a few of them were performing it louder now, which was always a sign that something underneath had shifted. The quiet ones had gotten quieter in a more focused way. And Walsh had started, very subtly, to watch Maya differently than he had that morning. Not with respect. Not yet. With assessment. He was reevaluating. She could see the machinery of it. He was a man who had built his identity on being the most capable person in the room, and the morning had offered some evidence that the room's definition of capable might need revision. And he was working through that in the way people work through information that challenged their architecture, slowly, defensively, with a lot of activity happening behind the eyes. Day 2 was physical. Not BUD/S. Not a torture test. But real enough, a timed water navigation exercise, a problem-solving course that required both speed and communication, and a debrief scenario that put people in lead positions and made them manage chaos with incomplete information and tired bodies. Maya ran the course herself. First, before any of the 14. This was a thing she did that had nothing to do with proving anything. She ran it first because she needed to know the actual times, the actual resistance points, the places where the course design created problems she hadn't intended. She needed to know the course with her body, not just with the design documents. This was how she had always operated. Learn the terrain before you send anyone into it. Do the thing before you ask anyone else to do the thing. She ran it in gear, in water, in the California morning cold, without telling anyone she was going to do it. And when Walsh came out to the starting area at 0545 and found her coming out of the water at the end of the first navigation leg, wet, completely matter-of-fact about being wet, making notes on a waterproof pad with the quiet focus of a woman who was 3 problems ahead of the current moment, he stopped walking. He watched her for a few seconds. She didn't look up. "You're on the course?" he said. "Every time," she said, still writing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's the second leg time on the rocks?" The tide was higher than the charts said yesterday. She looked up then, met his eyes, read the question and the thing underneath it, the genuine, professional curiosity of someone who cared about the mechanics of hard things and had for one moment forgotten to be performing. She told him the time, and the 2 best lines through the rocks given current tide conditions, and the section where the rope anchor needed to be reset before the first team went through, because she'd felt it shift. He wrote it down on the back of his hand. Not the legal pad this time. The back of his hand, like someone who had needed to remember something fast in a place where there was no paper and had never entirely broken a habit. Something about that, The back of the hand, the absence of a legal pad, made him more real to her than he had been the whole day before. "Walsh," she said. He looked up. "Why do you lead with the pad?" He blinked. "What?" "The yellow legal pad. You walked in with it yesterday. You've had it every session. You write on it before other people start talking." "What?" A pause. He was deciding something. "It signals preparation," he said. "To who?" Another pause. Longer. "To the room," he said. And then, quieter, "To myself." She looked at him for a moment. Then, she went back to her waterproof pad. "Preparation is real, or it isn't," she said. "Signaling it is a habit you picked up somewhere that made sense at the time. Worth asking if it still does." She closed the pad, walked back toward the staging area. He stood there on the wet concrete for a moment, water around his boots, California cold on his face. Then he followed. The third day was the one that changed everything. Not for Maya, for the room. It changed because of what happened with a man named Chief Warrant Officer Dennis Tolliver, 41, Army Special Forces, the kind of quiet competent that didn't make noise and didn't need to. He had been one of the better performers through days 1 and 2. Solid decisions, good communication under pressure, not showy but real. On day 3, during the leadership scenario, he froze. It wasn't a dramatic freeze. It wasn't a collapse. It was the specific, terrible stillness that takes over a person when a situation triggers something they haven't processed, when a scenario in front of them stops being a scenario and becomes for a few seconds something else entirely. He was leading the chaos simulation, information coming at him from 3 directions, artificial but realistic, and then one of the role players in the simulation said a specific phrase, a report-in phrase that meant a team member was down, and Tolliver went somewhere else. His eyes were present. His body was in the room. But the decision-making was gone, and everyone could see it, and nobody said anything for a full 4 seconds because nobody knew what to do with it. Maya was watching from the observation position. She let it run for those 4 seconds. Because 4 seconds of real was worth more information than an hour of performance. Then, she walked into the simulation space, stepped close to Tolliver without touching him, and said quietly, "Chief, what's the first thing?" Not a question. A reset cue. A small anchor dropped in fast water. He blinked. "First thing," she said again. "Secure the perimeter," he said. His voice was flat, automatic, the voice of training taking over when the person needs a moment to catch up to the training. "Good. Do that." And he did. The simulation ran. He finished it adequately, not brilliantly, but adequately, and when it was over and the room debriefed, she did not mention the freeze. She talked about the decision points, the communication choices, the things that worked and didn't, and at no point did she make Tolliver's moment into an example or a lesson or a cautionary note. Afterward, in the break, Walsh came to stand near her. "You could have stopped it earlier," he said. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" "Because stopping it earlier would have been about me," she said. "About me managing the room, protecting the optics, making sure nothing uncomfortable happened. Letting it run those 4 seconds was about him. He needed to feel the freeze and come back from it, not be rescued from it." Walsh said nothing. There's a difference between protecting people from hard things and protecting them through hard things, she said. The second one is the job. The first one is just comfort. He looked at her. Not the assessment look from day 1. Not the performance look. Something more honest than either. "Where did you do your first deployment?" he said. She told him. His eyes went to a place that recognized the name of that place. Understood what it meant. What had been in those years. What was asked of the people who went there. "How old were you?" he said. 26, she said. He nodded slowly. The way people nodded when numbers added up to something that demanded acknowledgement. "I had a bad one at 28, he said, not elaborating, just offering. The way soldiers sometimes offered things to each other. Not asking for a response, just letting it sit in the air between 2 people who had been to hard places and come back carrying weight they didn't talk about. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You read our files," he said. "I wrote the evaluation criteria," she said. "Every file that came through. I read it personally. Twice." He absorbed that. The fact of it, the carrot represented the hours, the deliberateness. The fact that she had come into this room knowing his bad year the way she knew the tide time on the second navigation leg. Not to use it against him, to know him, to know who she was asking hard things of and what they were carrying when they walked in. That's, he started. He stopped, finished the sentence differently than he'd started it. Most evaluators don't do that. I know, she said again. She picked up her coffee, a new one, also from outside the building because she had maintained her position on base coffee throughout, and walked back to the briefing room. He watched her go. The legal pad was sitting on the table in the briefing room. He looked at it when he walked in. He thought about what she had said about preparation being real or not real. He put the legal pad in his bag. He didn't take it out again for the rest of the week. By Thursday, day 4 of 5, the evaluation had done what evaluations under real pressure always did. It had peeled things back, not down to nothing, not brutally, but the professional surfaces that people carried into rooms like this, the posture, the language, the performance of capability, those had thinned in the way that surfaces always thinned under sustained, unglamorous work. What was left underneath varied. In some people, it was something harder and more honest than the surface had suggested. In others, and this was rarer but real, the surface had been the best thing, and what was underneath was smaller. Maya had seen both. She had learned, a long time ago, not to confuse the two or to feel contempt for either. People built the surfaces they built for reasons. The surface wasn't the lie. The surface was the armor. Her job was to understand what was underneath it well enough to know if the person could operate when the armor came off, because in the field, in the dark, in the place where operations actually happened, armor came off. It always did. The only question was whether what was underneath could function. Thursday's evaluation was the hardest of the week. She had designed it specifically to produce a moment of failure for every participant. Not optional failure, engineered failure. A point in each person's scenario where the variables were stacked deliberately to make the right decision impossible, where every available option was wrong in a different way, and the evaluation was not about finding the right answer, but about what the person did in the absence of one. This was, Maya had come to believe after 2 decades in special operations, the most important thing a person could show you. Not how they performed when success was achievable, how they moved when it wasn't. Walsh got his engineered failure at 1400. His scenario involved a hostage situation. 4 civilians, 2 of whom were intelligence assets, with a closing window, a compromised extraction route, and information that arrived in real time suggesting one of his own team members had been feeding location data to the other side. Not confirmed, just plausible enough that it had to be weighed. He had 6 minutes. He lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the scenario collapsed into an outcome where at least 2 of the 4 civilians were not recovered. He stood in the center of the scenario space afterward. The evaluators were silent. Maya walked in. He looked at her, and what she saw in his face was something she recognized because she had worn it herself a long time ago in a real situation that had not been engineered and had not been reversible. The specific expression of a person who has done everything the training said to do and still watched something go wrong and is standing in the gap between the world where effort equals outcome and the world as it actually operates. Debrief, she said. He walked her through it. His voice was steady. His analysis was good. He identified his decision points clearly, acknowledged where his assumptions had been wrong, noted the moment he had made a bet on the intelligence asset information, and how that bet had cost him time on the extraction. She listened to all of it. What would you have done differently, she said. He thought, actually thought, not the performed thinking that looked like a man considering options when he had already decided what to say. Real thinking, the kind that took a few extra seconds. I would have stopped trying to solve the impossible part, he said. I spent 90 seconds working the compromised team member angle because I thought if I could resolve that uncertainty, everything else would open up. But I couldn't resolve it. The scenario didn't give me the information to resolve it. So I wasted 90 seconds. And if you hadn't wasted those 90 seconds, 2 people recovered instead of none. Yes, she said. He absorbed that. 2 versus none. 90 seconds. The impossible part, Maya said, is always going to be there. In every real operation you will ever run, there will always be a variable you cannot resolve, and a piece of information you cannot get, and a decision that has no clean answer. The question isn't how to eliminate it. The question is how quickly you can accept that it exists and work around it. She paused. You're good, Walsh. You're genuinely very good. But you were trained in an environment that rewarded solving things, and you got very good at solving things, and now when something is unsolvable, your brain doesn't want to let go of it. That's not a flaw in you. It's an adaptation you made that served you in one environment and will cost you in another. He was quiet for a long time. How do you let go of it? He said. You practice deciding that something is unsolvable, she said. You practice saying the words out loud. This cannot be resolved. I'm moving on, until the part of your brain that wants to keep working on it understands it's not abandonment. It's priority management. He nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that meant the information had landed somewhere real. Did you ever fail one of these? He said. She looked at him. I failed a real one, she said. Not an evaluation. She said nothing else. He did not ask. He had enough of his own real failures to understand that the sentence was complete as it stood, and that asking for the details would be asking for something she had not offered, and that the fact she had offered the fact of it at all was already significant. I'm sorry, he said. It's operational history, she said. I use it. Friday. The last day. The final evaluation was not a scenario. It was a conversation, individual, one-on-one, 30 minutes each. Not an interview. Not a performance review. Maya sat across from each person in a small room with no recording equipment and no observers and talked with them. About the week. About their work. About what they had noticed and what had surprised them and what, if anything, had shifted. She went last to Walsh. He came in without the legal pad. Without the performance. He sat down across from her in the plastic chair that was the only chair available in the small room, and he looked like a man who had spent 4 days having things taken out of him. Not harshly, not cruelly, but the way a knot is slowly worked out a muscle with sustained pressure and patience until the tension releases and the muscle is longer and more functional and slightly sore. I came into this room Monday thinking I was going to be evaluated on what I knew, he said. What I could do. I thought the goal was to demonstrate operational competence. And now? Maya said, now, I think you were evaluating something else entirely, and the operational competence stuff was just the medium you were using to see it. What was the something else? He thought. Whether we could be honest, he said. Whether we could be honest about not knowing. About being wrong. About being scared. Whether we could do the job while also being human, I guess. Not performing humanity, but actually having it available. Maya looked at him for a moment. That's the most accurate thing anyone has said to me this week, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. What happens to Tolliver, he said. She had known he would ask about Tolliver. She had known because people who were becoming the right kind of leader started asking about other people instead of themselves. That's confidential, she said. I know. I am asking anyway. He'll be taken care of, she said. There are resources. He knows they're available. What happens with them is up to him. Walsh nodded. He's better than his Thursday looked, Walsh said. I know that, Maya said. His Thursday is why he's better than his Thursday looked. You don't get where he is without carrying something. The question is always what you do when it shows. A pause. You ever get tired of it? Walsh said. Not the job. This part. Walking into rooms and waiting for people to figure out who you are. Maya looked at the window. Small window. California light coming through it, flat and white and permanent. I used to, she said. For a long time I was angry about it. Not hot angry. The other kind. The kind that settles in and becomes part of the architecture. I thought proving myself repeatedly was a tax I was paying for being something this world wasn't designed for, a woman in a job that was built by and for men. And that's true. It is a tax. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. She looked back at him. But at some point I stopped paying it that way. I stopped making it about what the room owed me, which was respect, and started making it about what I owed myself, which was to be so thoroughly and completely the thing I had worked to become, that the room's acknowledgement of it became irrelevant. A silence. The room eventually always catches up, she said. It just doesn't get to be the measure of whether what you've done is real. Walsh sat with that for a moment. What made you stay, he said, after whatever the real failure was. What made you stay? She was quiet. The work is real, she said. The people doing it are real. The things that happen when it goes well are real. I couldn't find anything else that was as real as that. He nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. The 30 minutes were nearly gone. My closer notepad. Not the waterproof one, the evaluation one, the one that had 17 lines of notes about Garrett Walsh and his legal pad and his jaw and his real thinking and his question about Tolliver and this conversation. And she stood up. Thank you for the week, she said. Commander, he said. He stood, not the crisp military stand of day one. Something more natural. I came in here thinking I was going to teach this evaluation something. I ended up learning. He paused. I don't know how to measure what I learned. That's probably the point. That's exactly the point, she said. The results went out the following Monday. Walsh and Abra and Tolliver and 4 others were recommended for the next phase. The recommendation came with individual notes, specific, detailed, personal notes that each person would read in private, notes that named the specific moments when they had shown the thing that mattered and the specific moments when they hadn't, and what that gap suggested about what they needed to develop. Walsh read his on a Tuesday afternoon in an empty debrief room in Fort Bragg. The note was 4 pages long. The last paragraph read, "You are capable of being the kind of leader that people follow, not because you're the most decorated person in the room, but because you are the most honest one. The legal pad is a habit. The real preparation, the reading of files, the running of courses, the willingness to be wrong about what the room is about, that is not a habit. That is a choice. You started making it on Wednesday. Keep making it. No signature. No rank notation at the top. Just Commander Reyes." He folded the paper, put it in his pocket. He thought about a woman in a green jacket and jeans, drinking outside coffee in a room where she had been to every inch of the building and knew every tide time and had read every file twice and had been invisible until she chose not to be. He thought about what it cost to do that every time. To walk into a room and wait. To do the work in full knowledge that the room might never catch up. To make the work the measure instead of the acknowledgement. He thought about what it meant that she had done it for 22 years. He thought, that is what discipline actually looks like. Not the external kind, the salutes, the posture, the language of rank. The internal kind. The kind that shows up in a plain green jacket at 0630 with outside coffee and 17 years of classified history and no need to announce any of it. The kind that makes the work real, whether the room sees it or not. He went back to his office, opened his desk, looked at the yellow legal pad sitting in the top drawer. He thought about preparation that was real versus preparation that was signaling. He closed the drawer. He started working. Somewhere in Coronado, California, in a building that sat low and wide against the permanent sky, Commander Maya Reyes was running the next evaluation. She walked in at 0630. She was wearing civilian clothes. Nobody in the room knew who she was yet. That was fine. She knew. That had always been enough.